I'm sure there are things I could do better. I'm sure there are things I could have said better.
The moment Joni Lamb's latest interview hit the airwaves, everything changed. What was supposed to be just another sit-down turned into a firestorm, and now the viewers who once stood by her are speaking out loudly. Comment sections are exploding, support is fading fast, and accusations are flying. What exactly did she say that crossed the line? Why are longtime fans turning their backs? This isn't just controversy, it's a full-blown reckoning, and it's only getting worse. Joni Lamb's latest interview was supposed to be her big comeback. After months of controversy, criticism, and whispers surrounding her personal life and leadership at Daystar, she finally stepped into the spotlight to set the record straight. It was marketed as her most honest, vulnerable moment yet, the kind of emotional sit-down that could turn things around. The title? The Real Joni Lamb. Viewers expected answers, maybe even some accountability, but what they got was something very different and, for many, deeply disappointing. From the very beginning, it felt like Joni was performing. Her tone was soft, her expressions carefully controlled, and her message was clear. She wanted the world to see her as a woman of faith, strength, and endurance. She spoke about her childhood, her struggles, her connection to God, and her marriage to the late Marcus Lamb. She painted a picture of a woman who had walked through fire and emerged stronger, and to some degree parts of that were probably true. But something was missing: honesty. The interview focused so much on her past and her faith journey that it skipped right over the elephant in the room, the controversies that had made her a trending topic in the first place. When it came time to talk about her remarriage to Doug Weiss, the timeline didn't quite add up. She claimed to have grieved for 6 months before even thinking about moving on, but her honeymoon was booked before that grieving period was even over. That detail didn't escape viewers. Social media lit up with people questioning how someone could mourn so deeply while already planning a new future. Worse yet, Joni didn't really address the core issues at all. Allegations of internal issues at Daystar? She brushed past them. The leaked audio recordings from her son Jonathan that painted her in a very different light? She claimed she hadn't listened to one podcast or watched one YouTube video. That struck many as unbelievable, especially since her own media team had been actively responding to those very videos. The contradiction was clear, and people noticed. Instead of confronting hard truths, Joni leaned heavily into her usual narrative, that she was a woman led by God, misunderstood by the world, and targeted by people with bad intentions. It felt less like a moment of transparency and more like an attempt to control the narrative. The emotional moments, the tears, the soft voice, all of it came across to many as carefully rehearsed. Even parts that could have felt genuine, like her memories of Marcus, felt like they were being used to deflect from tougher topics. By the end of the interview, the mood had shifted. What was supposed to be a redemptive, healing conversation ended up stirring more frustration. People felt she had dodged every real question and used faith as a shield instead of a lens. The comments poured in, some from longtime supporters who were now heartbroken, others from critics who felt validated. One thing was clear: Joni hadn't won back her audience. If anything, she'd pushed more people away. In trying to rebuild her reputation, Joni may have underestimated how much people really wanted honesty, not polish. They wanted her to be raw, real, and accountable. What they got instead was a masterclass in image management. And now, instead of closing the chapter, she's opened the door to even more questions. The interview that was supposed to save her image might just be the one that defined its fall. When Joni Lamb announced her remarriage to Dr. Doug Weiss, it should have been a joyful, hopeful moment. A woman finding love again after tragedy. But instead of congratulations and celebration, the announcement was met with raised eyebrows, uncomfortable silences, and an internet firestorm that only grew louder with time. What should have been a personal milestone quickly became a public controversy, filled with questions, rumors, and suspicions that just wouldn't go away. Marcus Lamb, Joni's husband of decades and co-founder of Daystar Television Network, had only passed away months earlier. He wasn't just her husband, he was her ministry partner, the father of her children, and one of the most recognizable figures in Christian broadcasting. His death in late 2021 shocked the faith community. For many, Marcus and Joni had symbolized not just a marriage, but a spiritual partnership. So when Joni announced her engagement to Doug Weiss in 2023 and married him shortly after, it didn't take long for people to start asking, wait, already? The timeline was what made people uncomfortable. According to Joni, she had grieved deeply after Marcus's passing. She spoke in interviews about the heartbreak and the lonely nights. But viewers who were paying attention noticed something odd. Less than a year after Marcus's death, Joni was already seen in public with Doug. Then came the honeymoon photos. Then came the marriage. And that's when the public started doing the math. And didn't like what they saw. Joni claimed it was God's timing, that she never planned to move on quickly, but that God opened a door and she followed. But the phrasing felt too perfect, too rehearsed. People weren't questioning whether she had a right to remarry. They were questioning the timing, the speed, and, most of all, the authenticity. Was this truly a new chapter born from healing? Or was something else going on behind the scenes? The more Joni spoke about it, the worse things seemed to get. In her now infamous interview meant to clear the air, she said she had grieved for 6 months. A line that stuck with many. Because by the 6-month mark, she was already booking flights and making plans with her new fiancé. Viewers began comparing timestamps. When Marcus died, when she first appeared with Doug, when the wedding was announced, when the honeymoon happened, and the deeper people looked, the more uneasy they became. It wasn't just the timeline, it was the way Joni talked about it, as if people questioning her remarriage were the ones with the problem. She framed it all as part of a divine plan. She said she heard from God, and that her decision wasn't based on emotion but on spiritual conviction. But to many, it didn't feel like divine timing, it felt like a rushed replacement. And the more Joni leaned into her religious justification, the more critics accused her of using faith as a shield to avoid tough questions. Then came the speculation about when her relationship with Doug really began. Doug Weiss wasn't a stranger, he'd been a guest on Daystar several times. He and Joni had known each other for years. So naturally, people wondered, was this relationship truly new? Or had it been forming quietly behind the scenes while Marcus was still alive? That theory, while never confirmed, gained traction quickly online, and Joni never offered any real evidence to calm those rumors. Instead of addressing the questions head-on, she dodged them. She focused on her emotions, her healing, her letter to God. But viewers didn't forget that while she was telling stories about prayer, there were allegations swirling around, stories of internal Daystar drama, family rifts, and financial questions. At the center of it all was this remarriage, which seemed to symbolize more than just a personal decision. To many, it represented a shift in power, priorities, and maybe even values. Her children's reactions only added fuel to the fire. Jonathan Lamb, her son, later appeared in leaked audio recordings, expressing frustration and deep conflict over his mother's actions. He spoke of tension in the family, of decisions being made behind closed doors, and of Joni's behavior feeling manipulative and self-serving. While Joni downplayed the drama, calling it family business that didn't belong in the public eye, the recordings had already done the damage. People could hear it in Jonathan's voice, something was seriously wrong. There were also whispers about Joni's honeymoon being charged to the Daystar ministry card. While she denied this outright, documents began to circulate online, suggesting there might be some truth to the claim. Joni insisted that she paid for everything herself and that any misunderstandings had been cleared up. But in the court of public opinion, the doubt was already planted. People began wondering whether ministry funds were being used for personal luxury, and that's a hard question to shake. Through all of this, Joni continued to appear on Daystar, leading programs, speaking with guests, sharing spiritual messages. As if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The trust that viewers once placed in her had been cracked. The woman they once saw as a strong spiritual leader now seemed distant, defensive, and unwilling to acknowledge what everyone was talking about. It wasn't just about a marriage, it was about perception, accountability, and whether Joni had really been honest with the people who supported her for decades. The remarriage to Doug Weiss wasn't just a love story, it became a symbol of a deeper controversy. And as more time passed, the questions only grew louder. Did Joni move on too quickly? Was she already in a relationship before Marcus died? Why did she avoid the real questions in her interviews? And was she using her faith to cover up decisions that, to many, looked selfish or suspicious? These aren't easy questions, and Joni hasn't answered them. Instead, she's doubled down, insisting that she did nothing wrong, that the timing was right, and that the backlash is just noise from people who don't understand her walk with God. But in the world of public ministry, perception is reality. And whether Joni likes it or not, her remarriage, and everything surrounding it, has left a mark. For some viewers, it's a red flag they can't ignore. For others, it's the reason they stopped watching Daystar altogether. In trying to write a new chapter of her life, Joni Lamb might have accidentally closed the book for many of her supporters. What was meant to be a celebration of love and healing became a spotlight on doubt and unanswered questions. And until those questions are answered honestly, without spin, without vague statements, and without hiding behind carefully crafted narratives, the suspicion will linger. Because in the end, it wasn't the wedding dress or the honeymoon photos that sparked the backlash, it was the silence, the avoidance, and the feeling that something just didn't add up. And when faith-based leaders lose trust, it's not easily regained. Joni Lamb had a chance to clear the air. She had the stage, the cameras, the lights. Everything was set for her to finally address the swirling rumors, the uncomfortable questions, and the controversy that had taken over both her personal life and the ministry she helped build. Instead, what viewers got was a long, carefully managed performance. Not a confession. Not a breakthrough. Just more of the same, polished statements, emotional distractions, and vague religious platitudes that seemed designed more to dodge the truth than to tell it. From the moment the interview started, it was clear Joni wasn't planning to go deep. She opened with gentle reflections on faith, on life after loss, on how God always makes a way. Her tone was calm, her words were scripted, and while she nodded to the painful seasons she had gone through, she never once mentioned the words that everyone was waiting to hear: abuse, cover-up, accountability. Instead, she leaned hard into a narrative that has become all too familiar. The strong woman of God, misunderstood by the world, standing firm while critics circle like wolves. But this wasn't a normal PR problem. This wasn't about a bad headline or an offhand comment taken out of context. This was about serious allegations. Abuse within the family, financial misconduct, dishonesty, and spiritual manipulation. And, instead of confronting any of it head-on, Joni did what she's done from the beginning of this entire scandal. She avoided, she denied, and she tried to control the narrative. At one point in the interview, she was asked directly about the leaked audio from her son Jonathan Lamb, audio that exposed intense family conflict, hidden pain, and claims that Joni had been manipulative and self-serving in her personal decisions and her leadership at Daystar. Her response? "I haven't listened to it." She said she didn't watch the podcasts or YouTube videos discussing the recordings. She brushed it off as gossip, lies, half-truths. But viewers weren't buying it. And why would they? This wasn't just online chatter. Her own son, someone who had once defended her and the ministry, was speaking publicly, emotionally, and specifically. The pain in his voice was real. The betrayal he felt was raw. And Joni's refusal to even acknowledge it made her look cold, calculated, and out of touch. Her denial felt less like strength and more like someone pretending not to see the house burning down around them. People began asking, if she didn't hear the recordings, how did she approve the response videos? Because Joni's media team had been actively fighting back online, putting out content meant to correct the record and defend her reputation. So either she was involved in that, or she was letting others fight her battles, while claiming to be above it all. Either way, it didn't look good. And then there was the issue of her remarriage to Doug Weiss. It wasn't just that she moved on quickly, though that alone caused a wave of criticism. It was the way she explained it. "It was God's timing," she said. "He healed my heart." Maybe that would have been enough if it hadn't been for the suspicious timeline. Viewers had already done the math. They knew how soon after Marcus Lamb's death she had begun seeing Doug. They saw the photos, they tracked the dates, and when Joni said she grieved for 6 months, it felt like a line meant to check a box, not reflect a real emotional journey. People didn't want perfection. They wanted honesty. They wanted transparency. They wanted to hear her admit that it was complicated, that she had struggled, that maybe she didn't handle everything the right way. But instead, Joni doubled down. She said her decisions were guided by prayer, that everything she did was part of God's plan. But that explanation didn't feel like faith. It felt like deflection. The deeper the interview went, the more her audience felt like she wasn't speaking to them, she was speaking at them, trying to convince, not confess, selling a version of herself that no longer matched the person they were seeing on the screen. It was polished, rehearsed, and disconnected from the raw emotions and serious concerns that had driven so many people to speak out in the first place. Then came the financial questions. Allegations had surfaced that Joni had used ministry funds for personal expenses, including her honeymoon with Doug Weiss. When asked about it, she firmly denied the claims. "That's not true, I paid for it myself," she said. No evidence was shown, no receipts were shared, and while she may have believed her word was enough, the public trust had already been broken. The lack of transparency only made people more suspicious. As she continued to speak, Joni painted herself as a victim of false accusations, of people trying to bring her down. She never once said, "I understand why people are upset." She never acknowledged the pain others had expressed. It was all about her loss, her healing, her truth. And that's what made the interview feel so empty, not because she didn't say enough, but because what she said felt hollow. Her avoidance of the core issues left viewers with more questions than answers. What about the allegations of abuse within the family? What about the claims that she and Marcus knew and did nothing? What about the people who say they tried to speak up but were silenced? What about the donors and viewers who supported Daystar for years, only to feel like they were being lied to? None of those questions were answered. Some weren't even acknowledged. And that silence said more than any statement ever could. When people give their trust, especially in faith-based communities, it's not a casual thing. It's deep. It's personal. And when that trust is broken, when leaders dodge instead of lead, when they spin instead of speak the truth, it doesn't just disappoint. It hurts. Joni's refusal to face the hard truths wasn't just a missed opportunity. It was a clear sign to many that she wasn't ready, or willing, to take responsibility for what had happened under her watch. And the longer she avoided the truth, the more distant she became from the people who had once looked up to her. The aftermath of the interview was swift. Social media lit up with criticism. Longtime viewers said they felt betrayed. Some said they were done watching Daystar. Others said they were praying for Joni, not because they believed her story, but because they hoped one day she might finally come clean. What began as a chance at redemption turned into another reason to doubt, another layer of distrust added to an already fragile legacy. Joni Lamb may have hoped to control the narrative, but in doing so she revealed something far more damaging, that when faced with real questions, she chose to run from them. And now, the people who once believe in her aren't just waiting for answers, they're walking away. The fall of a public figure is never easy to watch, especially when it involves someone who built their platform on faith, family, and integrity. For years, Joni Lamb stood at the center of Daystar Television Network, helping shape it into one of the most influential Christian media platforms in the world. She was seen as a strong woman of God, a mother, a wife, and a leader. But now, all of that stands in question as the network finds itself tangled in a storm of allegations, growing public distrust, and a leadership crisis that no carefully worded statement can fix. It didn't happen overnight. The signs were there, subtle at first, then louder, harder to ignore. Rumors started swirling about tension within the Lamb family, and whispers of issues behind the scenes at Daystar began to spread. Then came the bombshell: leaked audio recordings of Joni's son, Jonathan Lamb, describing deeply personal and disturbing events. He spoke about family conflict, emotional manipulation, and, most shockingly, the alleged cover-up of sexual abuse involving his own daughter, Joni's granddaughter. The public was stunned. This wasn't just a story of family drama. These were allegations that cut to the very heart of what Daystar claimed to stand for. People wanted answers. They wanted transparency. But instead, they got silence. And then, when Joni did speak, what they got didn't feel like honesty. It felt like damage control. In her interview, Joni denied the abuse allegations completely. She said she had no knowledge of anything like that happening in her home and called the accusations baseless and part of a smear campaign. But for many, her denial wasn't enough. If she truly didn't know, why didn't she say she was going to investigate? Why didn't she show any concern for the people involved? Instead, her words were cold, defensive, and dismissive. It was hard to reconcile the image of a nurturing Christian leader with the woman on screen who seemed more focused on protecting her own reputation than seeking the truth. Worse still, there were financial allegations. Reports surfaced that ministry funds may have been misused. Some even claimed that Joni's honeymoon with Doug Weiss, which took place shortly after Marcus Lamb's passing, was paid for using Daystar's money. Joni denied this too, saying she paid out of pocket. But documents suggesting otherwise began circulating online. People started asking hard questions. Was Daystar being used as a personal piggy bank? Had donations meant to spread the gospel been redirected for personal comfort? Daystar viewers, many of whom had donated faithfully for years, began feeling betrayed. These were people who had sent in their last $20, 0 cents, believing it would help fund missions, not luxury vacations. And while the accusations hadn't been proven in court, Joni's flat refusals to engage with the details made it worse. She wasn't just avoiding questions, she was avoiding accountability. The network itself began to show signs of strain. Internally, there were reports of staff unrest, leadership shakeups, and confusion over who was really in charge. Ex-employees began coming forward with their own stories, some minor, some serious, all painting a picture of a place where loyalty was rewarded more than honesty, and questioning authority was seen as betrayal. Viewership began to drop. People who had tuned in for years said they no longer felt they could trust the voices behind the sermons. Social media became a battleground of opinions, some defending Joni fiercely, others calling for her resignation. What once felt like a strong Christian community now felt like a fractured organization hanging on by a thread. And yet, in the middle of this crisis, Joni continued to present herself as the victim. She spoke about spiritual warfare. She talked about how the enemy was trying to destroy the work of God. She insisted she had done nothing wrong and that the truth would come out eventually. But to many, that sounded like deflection. People didn't want vague spiritual metaphors. They wanted clear answers. They wanted a leader who would take responsibility, not hide behind scripture and PR tactics. The damage is real and it's ongoing. Daystar isn't just a media brand, it's a spiritual home for millions. But now, that home feels shaken. Trust, once lost, is hard to rebuild. And Joni Lamb's attempts to steer the narrative in her favor have only deepened the rift between the network and the people it once served. The crisis isn't just about Joni, it's about accountability. It's about what happens when faith leaders stop listening and start protecting their own image at all costs. It's about what kind of leadership truly reflects the heart of God, and whether Daystar, as it stands today, still has any of that heart left. There's still a chance for healing, for restoration, for truth. But that road starts with one hard thing Joni has yet to do: take real responsibility. Until then, the network remains in limbo, caught between the image it built and the reality it now faces. And with every unanswered question, the cracks grow wider.